Beyond Belief, Sobriety is a podcast for people who have found or who are seeking a secular path to recovery from addictions of all kinds. Today, my guest is Susie Darin. I learned about her while searching for social media groups for people in recovery, and I ran across one called the Soberish Book Club. It's a club that meets once a month on Zoom. They talk about a book. The group is open to anyone on the spectrum of questioning their relationship with alcohol, or even those who are solidly alcohol free. Susie is in the Tampa area, and there's a group of them in that city who, in normal non-pandemic times, will actually meet in person too. So it's so nice to have you here today, Susie. Welcome to Beyond Belief Sobriety.
Thank you so much.
So one thing I always like to do whenever I have a guest is to get to know them really from their story of recovery. I'd like to go through the story of the Soberish Book Club, and it had to start with your own personal story of recovery. If you wouldn't mind going into that a little bit, that would be great.
Absolutely. It's tied directly into my recovery. So my addiction is alcohol. And one way I was fortunate is I did not start drinking till after high school. I know a lot of people's stories start in high school or even earlier. And alcohol just really helped me, certainly in social situations, but also dealing with stress, I think, is one of the main ones. And sometimes people are social drinkers and sometimes people drink alone. I ended up tending more towards drinking alone, again, as sort of a coping mechanism for stress. And I had periods of my adulthood where I drank more and I drank less. And partly that had to do with environment. You know, if I was amongst more people or in a relationship with someone who didn't drink, then it was easier for me to back off a little bit. And I had points in my adulthood where I drank heavily, and I certainly had points where we would say were rock bottom or should have been points where I would have thought to have quit.
Right.
And including, I think a lot of people's rock bottoms have to do with that their addiction started affecting other people
Right.
who were not happy with that in some way.
Yep.
You know, so it doesn't always start from our desire to quit something. It's like, ooh, this is really getting in the way of other people. And so one point where I thought I would have quit is I was at a party, I think in my early 30s, and I literally fell into a fire pit and face first and burnt my face, being very, very drunk. And I healed from that and I backed off a little bit, but you know, still did that. Almost got a DUI at points. Drove numerous times drunk with my son in the car, you know, so all these things that should have shook me awake, but it didn't. And I think a few years back, I just really got tired of it. Though I had thought about quitting a number of times, it was a few years ago, I really got tired of it. And I started, as I guess over many years, I started, as many people do, starting to Google. And I have known people in AA, and I have stepped into a couple meetings, you know, during my adulthood, and it didn't grab me as the right fit. So I spent some time Googling things like ways to quit drinking besides AA and stuff like that, you know, all those.
Right.
And it was in 2017, I believe, that I started finding some things. And I think, you know, we're living in a period, and this is why your podcast is so, you know, pertinent, is we're living in a time where there's more widespread knowledge about the effect of alcohol and other drugs, and we're changing the conversation, and people are, you know, wanting to quit in all different ways. So one of the first people I found was Holly Whitaker, and she has a site, Hip Sobriety.
Yep.
And at that time, she and Laura McCowan were doing a podcast called Home, and I started listening to that, and they just spoke in a language, you know, that reached me, and I started finding books, I started with my first quit lit book was This Naked Mind by Annie Grace, that started to explain how alcohol is addictive in different ways than I had heard. And I went from there. And as many people do, it took me a long time before I felt like sobriety stuck. So I spent 2017 through 2019 maybe stringing days, weeks, months at different points of being completely alcohol free together. And I think I was still trying to fit alcohol in, as we do, seeing, well, maybe I can moderate, maybe I can be in more control. And so it was December 2019 where I realized, I have tried to fit this in, and it's precarious. It's like Russian roulette. You just never know what's going to happen. And when something goes wrong, it goes very wrong. So, it just got to a point. Sometimes I say that because I love drinking, I won't deny that, but I started to realize that there were other things in my life I liked a little bit more, at least enough more that it was worth to not drink to do those things, for sure. So that was December 2019. And September 2019, I actually started the book club.
Okay.
So that's, sort of good segue. And so during my couple years of playing around with sobriety, I did start to meet some sober friends through like some Facebook groups. And
I find that so interesting. You remind me, I don't know, you may have read this book, The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober by Catherine Gray.
Yes.
I love that book. I read it about maybe a year or two ago, and she talked about hip sobriety. She talked about sober groups on social media who she later met in person. And she had nothing to do. She said, hey, if you like 12 steps, you like that stuff, that's great, but it's not for me. But she found a way using just what we have today in the 21st century to connect with other people to support one another. And you remind me so much of what she did.
Yeah, and that's the biggest point, the connection. One thing I find when there are people who do not feel that AA is a good fit, sometimes they really try to separate themselves from it. But I think why AA works are some key points that people who do not do AA end up utilizing. And community is a huge one.
I think so.
And when I find people talking about not being able to quit, particularly because social media is so odd. So if you see on some Facebook groups, there's people who are saying, I don't understand. I've read books about this. I know I don't want to drink. Why can't I quit? A lot of times it's that they're lacking community and connection.
Right.
And the writer and speaker, Johan Hari, he talks about the opposite of addiction is connection.
Right.
And so if you work that equation backwards, that means addiction is isolation. And people can be isolated whether they are social or not. It's more about true connection, actually talking about what is really going on with you, with other people and hearing them as well. So in AA, there's certainly community. And I think it's essential for anyone, quitting. So I had started to meet some sober friends, but needed more.
Right.
And a friend of mine and I were having this, conversation like, hey, how can we get community? And so we decided on a book club, since we were starting to read all the time, about alcohol. And so the full name is from the get-go was Online Soberish Book Club. So the online is part of the name. And this was pre-COVID. It seems like a long time before COVID, but COVID was really around the corner.
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
And so our idea was that we would advertise it through social media, and we also did through Meetup, and that's how we, found some more people in our area, but that we would open it to anyone in different states or around the world. And we have had people from different states. We've had one person from another country pretty consistently, and she's in Australia.
Oh,
So she's 12 hours.
yeah, it's always kind of hard to figure out on
So
a different day.
yeah, so she's about to go to bed,
Right.
at 10 a.m. on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And so we got community, and these people that I've met through book club, there's been some consistent people, have become, good friends, and we've supported ourselves on our journey. It's so this is, something like a book club. That's definitely a difference with AA. Is it, a book club, it's one little piece, and when you're going on your own for trying to get sober, you need to have a lot of pieces in
Right.
place, not just one. But so we discuss a different book each month.
Hmm.
And because there were core people who had been sober, had been working on sobriety for a while, at one point someone brought up, hey, can we switch out not just books about alcohol or recovery memoirs, but switch it out with other self-help books or inspirational books? So that's what we do now. And that tends to lead to, a better conversation too, as we're really getting to know each other. Because if we're
Yeah.
limiting it to, are you staying sober
Right.
today, we're missing a lot of things.
Exactly. I think that's really
Yeah,
a good idea. And some of the books that you have coming up, I'm really looking forward to. I just started the one last night, and I plan on joining these groups. And it's something I personally need. I need to have more knowledge and different from different sources, and I think that that's a great way to do that and meet some people that are in a recovery, maybe in a different way that I am, and I like that. So
definitely,
so nice
definitely.
that you have been able to create a community like that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm glad to see that there's, like we've acknowledged in this time with the internet, there's so many different resources as well,
Yeah.
you know, and podcasts like yours, obviously, you know.
I think it's also nice that you open it up for those who are sober curious. They don't really know. They haven't really quite decided where they stand on the spectrum, and it is a spectrum,
Hmm.
of how you use alcohol. And I think that's great to give people time to decide what they want to do.
That's true. I think a lot of shame comes out of people feeling they have to be 100% sober right
Right.
away, which we sort of acknowledge is not usually anyone we admire who has been sober for a long time. They usually stopped and started,
Yeah.
a number of
Yeah.
times before it stuck. And there's an author, this is sort of controversial, it's not
Mm-hmm.
everyone's favorite, but there's author Adi Jaffe,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Adi Jaffe, and he wrote a book called The Abstinence Myth. And he recovered from, I think, meth and alcohol use, and then he worked in recovery. And he was observing that when people enter some type of recovery program, often, a structured treatment program, whether it's inpatient or outpatient, that they're told, okay, you have to agree to be clean and sober. You're going to be meeting with a therapist or group sessions, and you have to be honest,
Mm.
and you can't use. And he did some research and found that it's like over 90% of people use while they're in some type of recovery program, but they're told they can't, and they're told they can't
Oh.
lie, but they end up lying to stay in recovery. So
Uh,
he wants to approach the people who feel they failed,
right.
and to acknowledge that we can say relapse, or
Mm-hmm.
we can say, it took a while to get started, or something on being completely clean and sober. And so he has a focus more on acknowledging those people. And so that was sort of an inspiration from him, is acknowledging. Yeah. So I put out on my Facebook page, once in a while, to remind people as well. Anyone questioning their relationship with
Right.
alcohol is welcome. And it can be other
Sure.
substances, as well. Like I said, alcohol was my journey, and that's,
Right.
I connected with people who their primary addiction, was alcohol, but a lot of people had multiple addictions for sure.
And another thing about that too is it's nice to get away from having to worry about, am I an alcoholic? Do I have alcohol use disorder? Even in Catherine's book, she talks about, not drinking is just good, healthy practice for anyone. And if you want to
Right.
do something good for yourself, you don't have to worry. You don't have to put any kind of a label on yourself, So it's kind of nice that you have it open for anyone who just, you don't have to worry about that part of it. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yes, definitely. For sure. Yeah, and we often compare ourselves to other people as well,
Yes,
and that can be a barrier for us. You know,
it
there's
is a
the,
huge barrier.
yeah.
I was 19 years old when I first started questioning my alcohol use. Figured I was too young. And
Mhm.
by the time I was 25, I still thought I was too young. And that's when I had to stop because life had just gotten really, really bad. But that word alcoholic, that word was really, that's what kept me from even thinking of, it was just, I couldn't accept that. I just didn't think that that was even possible.
Yeah, yeah, and
you know?
because I definitely have friends who identify as an alcoholic and it works for them.
Yeah,
Um, but for a lot of people, yeah, it's a barrier.
it
If we
is.
think if we don't fit into that definition, then we aren't. And Holly Whitaker writes about, that term was specifically for alcohol, and we don't say we're a cocaineaholic or a
Right, right,
cigaretteaholic.
right.
And alcoholic is a term that ended up benefiting big alcohol because
Isn't
then
that interesting?
then they could say, oh, well, most people can consume our
It's just these
product.
oddballs here.
Yeah. So keep giving us money if you're not
right,
not one of those, and those are special people. So yeah,
right.
yeah, and that brings up, I think it's really important for people to play around with language.
Mm,
We're in a period where people are telling personal stories. There's personal stories about sexual assault, about, involving police violence, involving gender identity, involving, sexual identity. So we're really in a time of people getting in touch with who they are and sharing
right.
their stories. And so we each have the right to use our own
Absolutely. It's
language,
very
around
important.
it.
Very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
That was that's something that I had to learn very late in life, but it's critical for me now not to accept other people's labels for me or to describe my recovery or my or what I'm doing for my own benefit and my own health in ways that to conform with them. I spent a lot of time conforming.
Yes.
and
Yes.
I
Yes.
just, and after a while, I realized I was doing that. And looking back on it, it was a very difficult thing to come to terms with. It's like, wow, I can't believe I did that. But I was just conforming to what the group kind of expected me to say and do.
Yes, and I like listening to your podcast. I learned a lot about, you know, um, atheist and agnostic,
yeah.
AA groups, and that's a good point, because once you're willing to say what you really think, then you
Oh my
find
gosh.
others. You
yes,
know?
you do start finding others. You find others and you find, you learn, boy, it just opens up a whole different world. You find other people like you and you find people that you thought were liked you that now suddenly don't really want anything to do with you. And it's just, it's very, very, very weird. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think it's improving a little bit now though, but still it was kind of
I
weird.
think I think I'd heard on your podcast, did you say that once you sort of came out as agnostic, then your home group that you had been with for a long time had sort of shunned you, or was that you or a
Well,
guest?
they started correcting me on things.
Mm,
so it's all about language too. So
yeah,
I started using different vocabulary.
yeah.
I don't need a higher power. Um, I don't. I just lot of different things like that. But that was the main one, and there was a lot of pushback on me on that. I would dispute a lot of the stuff that we would read. I'd say not that doesn't really. I don't really believe that, and
Hmm.
it was not it wasn't really welcomed. And that's okay. I mean, I can kind of get it if everyone else was doing what I was doing and conforming to what the group consensus was for the way that we should talk and so forth, then that's fine. They were also older people. I mean, I think that you find them mostly like me, my age, male, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
they were comfortable with that,
Yeah.
and that was just their way. But there's a whole other group of people out there that aren't comfortable with that, and I started meeting them after I left that group. It's really
Right.
interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. I Yeah, it's amazing. And if that certain box works for people, it's awesome. I think part of the problem is some of those people don't see, oh, this is what works for me, and there might
Right.
be things that
Right.
differently
They
that
they
work for
project
other
that it ever
people.
works on everybody else. Yeah. And that's something I have to remember, because I'm a big believer in that a person needs to find their own way. That I think that recovery is self-directed, that each person needs to have their own experience and find their own way, mix and match whatever works. I'm fine with. And I don't like this what I see often within different communities online and so forth that I've been involved with, where people put themselves in on teams. I'm the AA team, I'm the smart recovery team, I'm this
Hmm.
team, and my way is the best way, your way isn't good, and they argue and fight. I think that's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, there's a lot of
So
bashing. It's a lot like politics,
yes, it
It's
is like politics, isn't it?
it's the same. One thing when you had mentioned when you talked about bringing up just the idea of not drinking for your health
Right.
during this pandemic year, where there are people who pro-mask, anti-mask, pro-vaccine,
Uh-huh.
anti-vaccine, and then a lot of people who are saying we have to follow what the CDC
Mm-hmm.
is saying. It's interesting because a lot of people I know who were like, we got to listen to science, we got to listen to CDC, drink. And the CDC on their site has a lot of information about alcohol. And one thing I think in their latest report, they went so far as saying, because they've said for a while, alcohol can contribute to, I think there's like 8 different cancers.
Mm.
And they actually said in their last report, and drinking even less than 1 glass a day can put you at risk
Isn't
for
that
that.
interesting?
Because before they would lean a little bit towards, well, moderation, 2 to 3 glasses a day, you're in a better state. But they actually said you're putting yourself at risk with less than 1 glass a day. And so many of our friends who are saying, we've got to follow the CDC guidelines for COVID, are
Right.
not willing to put down their alcohol for,
Right.
for cancer reasons,
Yeah.
definitely.
So what are some of the more memorable books that you all have discussed over the last year and a half that you've been meeting?
I think so. Actually last month, I think people really like this. We read Blackout by Sarah Hepola,
Mm-hmm.
and she's a journalist, so it's a recovery memoir.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd say that really stood out, and also Holly Whitaker's Quit Like a Woman, because she
Oh
goes
yeah.
into some different ideas. But I will say that in the group, everyone gravitates to books differently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but one thing I liked about Blackout was it, I haven't written my own recovery
Mm-hmm.
memoir, so I'm sure it's a tricky thing to figure
Yeah.
out how to do. And sometimes people find describing drinking as triggering,
Mm.
so you got to have a good balance with that, but really describe what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But she did a great job at describing how you're wanting to drink less. That's the dangerous part, and how that can go from an intention to have 1 glass of wine or champagne or whatever it is at dinner, and how that can turn into a really disastrous night, and how quickly it gets out of control. So she described that really well. I'm also, right now I'm reading, though it's not for my book club, I'm reading Broken by William Cope Moyers.
Uh-huh.
That's a long one. And he does the AA approach, but he really described relapse
Mm.
very well, and what goes into that. Um, so I think for me, I often gravitate to books where they describe once you've quit drinking or once you're working on quitting drinking, like what the appeal can be to start again and what to watch out for,
Interesting.
and how that can be dangerous. But we've also, so that's like Blackout and Broken, those are memoirs, but there's also and Quit Like a Woman is part memoir, and part information. But there's books such as This Naked Mind by Annie Grace and
I got to read that one.
Alcohol Explained by William Porter.
I've read that one. Yes.
Yeah.
I had him on a podcast episode.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, he's really, really nice.
I like following him.
He's great.
One of my favorite things about him is he definitely, he's written numerous books. He has a following, but he still has a day job, and he still is so active in engaging with his followers. So I'm just really impressed how he does that. But so there's books like Alcohol Explained that just sort of explains what alcohol is doing, explaining
he does a
why
really good
it's
job with it. He does a really simple way that anyone can understand. I thought he did a great job. Plus, I love how he also supplements that with his Facebook page and his website, and he connects with his audience. It's pretty cool what he's got going on.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting sort of seeing the sobriety business, not to put a negative slant on it, but people are really wanting a lot of books on how to get sober and about it. And some people have, turned this into their full-time work. And, people do it in different ways. So yeah, I'm really impressed at how he's still able to engage with people, so much.
And
for
it
sure.
amazes me too. This is what got me curious to looking for social media groups like yours. It just, to me, it's amazing. Cause I started dealing with my drinking back in 1988 is when I got sober. And at that time, if you wanted a book, you went to the bookstore and you looked around, you went to the library. There just wasn't a lot of information at your fingertips that was easy to get. It was difficult for people to organize into groups. And now it's a completely different universe. And no one, I think, could have ever predicted this, that someone like William Porter could write a book, build a community around that, and people are getting well. People are moving, their lives are getting better and improving because of that. And they don't need the traditional programs that were started in the pre-internet era, I guess you might want to say. And I'm kind of learning about this kind of late in life, but it's just like amazing to me. It's still just like amazing.
It is. But, sort of what we talked about earlier, even when people aren't using a structured program they are using the components. I think that's really important, because with social media, I find I call people who aren't engaged and taking a lot of action as lurkers on social media. And if you're not really connecting, so I do find some of those people who are like, well, I'm on these social media groups and I'm reading books and I just can't quit. And so real connection is really important. So you got to find that in some way. And if you don't go to a structured program, you gotta put a little effort into that for sure. And another thing in AA is service, the importance of helping other people. And so, and it takes many forms. Like you have a podcast, which is helping people. I host a book club, and we have done some other groups, during COVID, like I did a Zoom women's group that's on hiatus right now. But anything, any resource that you can provide for someone, or to put yourself out there that you are available for people to reach out to, that's a form of service for so as well. So I think the components in structured programs are really important, because I know sometimes I've heard my friends introduce me to other people, saying something like, oh, she just got sober from reading books, and it wasn't that, because that wasn't working. And that's why I had to, my reading books and listening to podcasts all alone
Right.
was not working. And so that's, I had to find sober friendships. I created a book club, and then I've gotten involved in other people's communities too.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's a huge part, because
Yep.
I don't think for me, being the physical isolating, I think I'm more of an introvert, and that's what gets me into trouble. It's like, I think, okay, I just want to stay at home all weekend by myself. That's where it had been dangerous for me in the drinking,
Yeah, I need to watch out for that just for my own mental health too. I rely on this podcast a lot for gosh, it helps me with in all kinds of areas. I learn a lot from guests. It helps me with my recovery, keeps me involved. The service component that you mentioned, but sometimes lately what I've been trying to do is spend more time with the podcast and less time with the community that I was involved with previously. And so, although I'm still connecting with people like you and talking to people like you, I'm missing the other type of form of community that I was involved in before, where I'm not actually, doing a podcast or something, but just actually being a person talking, I'm realizing that I've kind of pushed a lot of people out, and it's going to be easy to bring them back in again, but I kind of feel the need to do that.
That's a really good acknowledgement. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sort of the same way. I'm presently in school, and I'm a mom, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm busy, and there are some self-care things involving community that in looking at my busy schedule right now, sometimes, I'm like, okay, well, I can't
It's
do
hard to find
everything.
that balance, isn't it?
It really is. One fun thing, I'll say this in case your listeners are inspired in their communities. One thing that we've done locally with some sober women, we meet every other Saturday at a different park in the area. Okay, I live in Florida, so this
Right.
works
Right.
year round. But we meet at a different park. It could be at an inside place as well, every other week, and we call it the women's sober Saturday stretch and kvetch. So
Oh, I like it.
they might do yoga, they
Mm-hmm.
might do some physical therapy exercises they learn. Maybe they're just lying on the
Yeah.
floor, stretching their legs a little bit, and we're chatting, and we're sober women, and we're chatting, and it's community. And that was one, because so I'm in school, and the end of the term is nearing. It's getting busier, and I really thought about saying, oh, I can't do the next stretch and kvetch. And then
Mm-hmm.
I had to, realize that that is so important
Yeah. Isn't
for
it
me.
though?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it does so much. So yeah, but we need constant reminders at that
Yeah.
self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm realizing that as well. It's like I'll just say maybe from one extreme to the next. Like I'm doing way too much going on in my life. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna put all this other stuff away, get all that out, and just do this one thing. And you need a little bit of variety. So.
Definitely. And that was, when we were talking about William Porter, I
Hmm.
really admire him, but that's one of my thoughts. I hope he's connecting to other people,
Yeah.
because he's so
Oh,
involved
that's
in,
true. He is.
in his book and online community. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to reach out to him, by the way, and get him back on again to see what he's doing. He also wrote a book
Yes.
about quitting smoking.
Were you a smoker? Are you a smoker?
I quit like God, about 1999. So that was a
Okay.
long time ago. Yeah. So
So that was like 10, 11 years after you quit
that's
alcohol?
right. That's right.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I know. That was my early, like years ago, that was my early impression of AA. And I
Oh
think
yeah,
my
it's
dad
true.
my dad did AA too. Is, okay, people quit alcohol, and then they drink a lot of coffee and smoke
It's true.
cigarettes,
It's
but
true.
I know I've heard it's not good to try to tackle all of your addictions at
I've
once,
heard both. I've heard both. I've
Yeah.
heard that's the common advice you get in 12-step groups. But I've also read that it's actually better to go ahead and stop them all at one time. I don't know. I went 10 years not drinking and continuing smoking, but society changed so much over that period of time. So back in the 80s when I was drinking, back in the 80s when I was drinking, So at work, I could actually sit at my desk at work and smoke cigarettes, right?
Yeah.
It was not, it was weird, you know. And then it was like in the early 90s that started changing. And people says, no, we're going to build a special room for you folks to go smoke. And
Mhm.
they put us in these like isolated rooms that you everybody would smoke in. And then it was like, okay, that's not working. You guys going to have to go outside. I don't care how cold it is. You're going to smoke
Right.
outside.
Right.
So it just so society was making it more and more and more difficult. So I think that actually did help me in a way, because it's like, you know what, this isn't
Yeah.
working.
That's a really good point. People don't believe me on this, but it's good that it's being recorded, so mark my words.
Hmm.
So with smoking, and I like that series Mad Men because
I
it's
love
all
that.
about
Yes.
the smoking and the marketing. And
Exactly.
so there was a point, when we were growing up, all movies, people were smoking, and all the people we were admiring were smoking. And there was a push at one point, as there were more anti-smoking campaigns, there was a push for Hollywood to not have people
Right. I
smoking.
remember
And
that.
that eventually, took root, where
Hmm.
unless it's really particular to the
That's
character,
right.
they don't.
Right.
And at the time, people couldn't imagine watching movies without people smoking. And I think the same thing's about to happen with drinking, because any romantic story, they get together
Right.
with drinks, and any end of a hard day, any powerful person is drinking. All these different people we see drinking in movies, and I think there will be a push to stop that. And
Interesting.
I think that will start to help with
It
our
will.
perception.
It
Yeah.
will. It will definitely change the way that society feels about these things, about drinking and alcohol in particular, just the way it did with smoking. It
Yeah.
absolutely had an impact on me, and I think a lot of people. We have a lot less people smoking now than we used to. So
Yes. I know a lot of people still do smoke, but
they do. They
but
do. Not
unfortunately,
near as much as they used to.
right, yeah, yeah, it is not common, and they're not smoking around other people all the time
Right.
too, which,
One funny story I always like to
yeah.
tell people that it shows you how different the world is now. But when I was a kid growing up, my parents did not smoke. However, they kept a beautiful silver tray of cigarettes on the coffee table and a lighter, so that when their guests came over, they could offer them cigarettes.
Wow. People do with that with the alcohol too. People
They
who
do
don't
with
drink.
alcohol
So
now,
yeah,
don't they? Yes, they
yeah.
keep alcohol around so they can offer it to their friend. Hmm.
It's funny, my whole family, because it was my mom, my dad, my sister moved back in with her two kids, so we had a full house. But everyone in my household ended up smoking except for me. And,
Mm,
my parents smoked, since before I was born. And one of my biggest memories, because I was a kid in the 70s,
hmm.
for Easter, in my
Yeah.
Easter basket, they gave me chocolate cigarettes.
Oh
That
yeah,
was
that's
like a
right.
product.
Right. How funny.
Like, get used to it. So,
Right. Oh man. Well, this was so much fun. I really enjoyed this
yes.
conversation, and I'm so happy that I learned about your book club and that I'm actually starting to read these books now. I think it's going to be good for me, and I look forward to participating in the next meeting that you guys have. And to find it, just go on Facebook and search for Online Soberish Book Club. Is that the best way,
Yeah,
Susie?
it's Online Soberish Book Club group, but
Group.
as
Okay.
soon as you start, and the only reason that is the name on Facebook, and I like to emphasize that because it took me a while to learn this. You can set up a business Facebook page or a group, and a group is private, so
Okay.
any interactions you have, like there
Oh
won't be a
yes.
bleed
Right. Right.
to your
Right.
personal account. So
Right.
yeah, add Online Soberish Book Club group
Okay.
on Facebook. Yes.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and play our music to get out of here. Here we
Okay,
go.
thank you.
And that's another episode of Beyond Belief Sobriety. Thank you for listening, everybody. If you'd like to help support our podcast, you can do that in a couple of ways. Go on over to patreon.com/AA, no, patreon.com/Beyond Belief Sobriety. And you can become a patron. You can also join our YouTube channel, or you can just go to our website, beyondbeliefsobriety.com, and click on the donate button. But if you can't do any of that, that is totally okay. We're going to keep doing this because I like doing it. Susie, thanks again. It was just a real pleasure talking to you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.